On this programme, the very latest news. The 2 American hostages released by Hamas were kept in underground tunnels in Gaza.
I spoke with my daughter earlier today. She sounds very good. She looks very good. She was very happy. And she's waiting to come home.
Egypt's border crossing with Gaza finally opens. Limited aid for a population stuck in a humanitarian crisis.
Now, food, water and medicine has been transferred through Egypt to the people of Gaza. Only in the southern part, we're not letting in any petrol.
And the horror of Be'eri Kibbutz. We witnessed the bullet-ridden, burnt-out homes where more than 100 people were killed by Hamas. Children's schoolwork on the floor as well in here. A little desk. Photos on the wall of the family. Treasured photos of their family.
For this special programme, we will be live here in Jerusalem, bringing you the latest on this devastating and deepening war.
And here in Ashkelon, just north of the Gaza border, looking back at the deadliest days of this never-ending conflict. And we'll hear from our correspondents across the region. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, in Jerusalem. In southern Israel is our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, tracking the military build-up on the Gaza border. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has a report from protests in the West Bank. Live in Egypt, as the Rafah border crossing opens, is our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bahir. And our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, is in Beirut, in Lebanon, amid fears this war could spread.
It is the first glimmer of hope in a story of unending gloom. 2 American hostages are free today after a fortnight in the hands of Hamas in the tunnels below Gaza. To begin the programme, our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, reports now on a key diplomatic breakthrough.
Last night, somewhere along the Israel-Gaza border, Judith and Natalie Ranam, an American mother and daughter, were handed over by masked Hamas fighters into the care of the International Red Cross. In this video, which was released by Hamas, they look exhausted and dazed. No wonder. After being held for 2 weeks without any contact or knowledge of whether they were even alive, their family were understandably relieved and delighted.
I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, for 2 weeks. I haven't been sleeping for 2 weeks. Tonight I'm going to sleep good. I spoke with my daughter earlier today. She sounds very good. She looks very good. She was very happy. And she's waiting to come home. Her mother has a little scratch on her hand, but she told me it's nothing. She's okay.
They were taken to a military camp in central Israel and reunited with relatives. There, they spoke to President Biden on the phone.
How was your call with the Americans? Well.
Judith and Natalie had been visiting relatives in Kibbutz Nahal Oz when Hamas fighters broke through the border fence and went on a murderous rampage exactly 2 weeks ago.
It's been an impossible situation these past 2 weeks. We're a very peaceful people. We are people that believe in the sanctity of all human life, whether they're Israelis or Palestinians. And so we as a family have just kind of had to buckle down because we knew as tough as we were having, dealing with the emotions, that doesn't compare at all to what Natalie and Judith are going through. And so it's been 13 days and it's felt like 13 years.
In Tel Aviv yesterday, a table was laid for a Shabbat dinner with 203 empty chairs, one for each hostage taken. This is the worst hostage crisis in Israel's history, and it is having a deep effect on a country that prides itself for never leaving one of its own behind. Natalie turns 18 next week. She will now be able to spend her birthday at home in Illinois, surrounded by family. Meanwhile, hundreds of other families still wait. Was this release just the start, or just a one-off? Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Israel.
And Alistair is with me now, a first real sign of hope. Is it an indication more hostages could come out?
It is good news. It is good news after a fortnight of tragedy and desperation. 2 hostages released, but still more than 200 being held captive in Gaza. And that is playing on the psyche of Israel like you cannot imagine. It is literally written in the Jewish scriptures that you retrieve the captives. And so what it is a sign of is that the mediation, primarily through Qatar, who have a direct link to Hamas, has had some success, but they'll need to go further. And the question is now is how does that affect Israel's planned military ground operation? There are reports that some American and European pressure is being put on the Israelis to just press the pause button on that in case more hostages could be freed through diplomatic channels. That would be the preference. It's much better to do it that way than to go in kicking indoors and shooting away, and particularly, as we've heard, they were being kept underground and a lot of them will be spread around the Gaza Strip. So will Israel take that tack, or will they feel that now their military preparation is built up, they've been given the green light we understand to go, they will want to go into Gaza before Hamas has time to regather, regroup and prepare itself for the battle ahead.
OK, Alistair, thanks very much indeed.
Well, there is more good news today. The first aid has crossed into Gaza after the Rafah border crossing was finally opened after days of negotiations. Lorries carrying humanitarian aid started moving into the border crossing area from Egypt just after 10 local time this morning. But it's not much, 20 trucks at most for a population of more than 2 million people. But even then, Israel's bombardment continues. Several people killed as they sheltered in a church. This report now from our international correspondent John Sparks contains images of the aftermath of an airstrike.
If it qualifies as an agreement, it is chaotic and unclear, but it has resulted in this. The first 20 trucks, loaded up with life-saving supplies, have passed through the Rafah crossing in Egypt. This development is the result of days of negotiation. Yet the World Health Organization said this convoy would barely address Gaza's needs. Their officials calling for 2,000 trucks, not 20. And that's a view that's been endorsed by the UN Secretary General at this summit in Cairo.
The people of Gaza need a commitment for much, much more. A continuous delivery of aid to Gaza at the scale that is needed. The time has come for action. Action to end this god-awful nightmare.
A few miles from the crossing, Israel pounds targets as part of their campaign against Hamas. And the Israelis don't want the militants to benefit from these shipments. Their officials won't allow supplies of fuel, although hospitals in Gaza depend on diesel for power. The Israelis have dismissed these concerns.
The humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is under control. We're continuing to emphasize to the residents of Gaza City and its surrounding areas to move south. The humanitarian supplies that will enter the Gaza Strip will go to the south.
International aid agencies have become increasingly alarmed, with food stocks running low and civilians forced to drink dirty water. Half the population remains in the northern section of the Strip, where a blast from an Israeli airstrike destroyed the hall and scout center at this Orthodox church. The Christian community had been using them as shelters. Put your hand under Salim, said one, as parishioners tried to extract their friends and loved ones from the rubble. This man had lost his life. God has deserted us, said some. Some, like this father of 3. Look at this child. Do you think he deserved to die? Said Ara Mansouri. He showed our team pictures of his children, Majdi, Julie and Swella. All 3 died in the blast.
This is a crime.
It's a crime against humanity. This F-16 aeroplane threw these things knowing there were people down there. They did it with hatred. No one in Gaza feels safe, but being in the church gave us the feeling that we were close to God.
Once aid shipments are brought into Gaza, the contents have to be distributed, and it is a weighty logistical challenge. Here, residents search for survivors after an airstrike in central Gaza, where everything is scarce, including security. John Sparks, Sky News.
Well, the ground offensive may not have started, but the front line in the Israel-Hamas war is already intense and dangerous. Satellite images have revealed a build-up close to the border. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes has been with troops preparing for war.
A different kind of front line in Israel's war with Hamas. The Navy allowed us to film on a patrol vessel off the Israeli coastline, close to Gaza. Smooth sailing now. But Hamas used these waters as part of their unprecedented assault on Israel 2 weeks ago. Footage shared by the military shows fast boats trying to storm the shore, coming under Israeli fire.
The teams and the Navy forces out at sea identified and eliminated many of these horrible terrorists. And we will keep doing our assignment of protecting this area.
And since the 7th of October, have there been any other attempts by Hamas to attack Israel from the sea?
Yes, there's been attempts, but...
What sort of things have happened?
There's many threats from the sea. Let's keep it at that.
They're threats that will likely only grow when, as anticipated, Israel starts a major ground offensive into Gaza.
Israel knows it has to protect its shoreline. That's why you've got patrol ships like this one out at sea looking for threats from Hamas coming from the water, and also seeking to stop efforts to smuggle more weapons into Gaza.
Satellite imagery shows a big buildup of Israeli ground forces off the northern tip of Gaza. The picture on the left is from the 16th of October, compared with the one on the right, taken 8 days earlier. The Israeli Defense Minister earlier spelling out a 3-stage plan to eradicate Hamas.
We will destroy the Hamas organization, eliminate the military and governmental infrastructure. That's the first thing. It's not going to be easy. There will be a toll.
With Israeli jets already pounding Gaza from the air, that toll won't just be felt here in the south, but also on Israel's border with Lebanon and in the West Bank. Trouble too out at sea. An American warship on Thursday intercepted missiles and drones launched by Houthi militants in Yemen, who, like Hamas and Hezbollah, are backed by Iran. As for Israel's Navy, time for another patrol. These sailors well aware they could soon be facing some even bigger dangers. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Southern Israel.
Well, Deborah joins me now here in Ashkelon. For 2 weeks now, we've been talking about a ground offensive. Where is it?
Well, it's not moving forward at the moment. I mean, the fact is that everyone was expecting this ground offensive to have happened, to have started perhaps even a week ago, when there was a lot of language. There was a huge build-up of military force here in the south over the past 2 weeks. You can see artillery pieces, you can see tanks massing at the border, thousands of troops. And every day now we're getting messages from commanders on the front line. We've had a defence minister visiting, the Prime Prime Minister visiting, saying that the troops are preparing for the next phase of this campaign, but they've yet to go in, they've yet to launch it. And from my knowledge of having seen the way that the Israeli military operates, they like to try to maintain an element of surprise. Clearly, there's no surprise with troops on the border, but you can expect that when they do go in, perhaps they won't be talking quite so openly just before then. So the fact that they are talking openly about how ready they are now means that maybe it's still a few more days to go.
Deborah, thank you. Well, it was 2 weeks ago today when events unfolded which began this conflict. A series of attacks on Israeli military bases, settlements near the border, and a music festival. The death of at least 1,400 Israelis. A population terrorized, confidence in the military and intelligence services shaken to the core. Well, among the worst hit, the Kibbutz of Be'eri. 1 in 10 there lost their lives. Hostages were taken into Gaza. I went to see the impact. The thing about Be'eri, it was supposed to be a little piece of paradise, a dream come true for people to live here. You see the fruit growing on the trees, the collective spirit, everybody looking after each other, you know, their own agriculture growing. But it's so close to the border. It would have taken minutes, just minutes, for those Hamas militants to get here that morning.
They came through the fence in the back of you. There's a road in the back of the fence. They drove through with heavy machine guns and pickups and just shot everything in sight.
It was in the half-light of the early morning on October the 7th that the day of horror began. The Hamas militants crossing the border, many of them on motorbikes, their AK-47s and their RPGs slung across their shoulders. Filming themselves to later upload their murderous campaign of terror. The date carefully chosen on a Jewish holiday.
Every way they couldn't get it done in a minute. They had flamethrowers, got into the buildings. Every house in the kibbutz has a bomb shelter. And they knew all about it, and what they did, the doors, the metal doors to the bomb shelters is not bulletproof. So they shot through, and those that they couldn't, they either blew it up or they burned the house down on its people.
Well, people living so close to the border are extremely well drilled. If they hear noises, the rocket attacks anticipated, they go to their safe room and they know they'll be safe here. It's got reinforced concrete and a steel door. But this is what happened. People came into the houses, the doors, bullet there. You can't lock the handle. And we've had so much testimony that people spent hours taking it in turns, holding onto the handle so that people couldn't open the door. The problem is, of course, that grenades were thrown and many of these rooms, the buildings were then smoked out. Not this one, but many were. Many families spent hours in here. Can I ask you to paint a picture of those terrifying hours of waiting for the families in their safe rooms?
Since we were in the squad, our families would call us, come be with us. We were afraid. And eventually we found out that the doors, the metal doors, are not allowed, they couldn't lock them from the inside. So they held the handle and they got shot through the door. And these magnificent young people who went out with us, that young families would call and come back and be with us, stayed outside with hardly any weapons. And I think the heroes are the families who stayed indoors for 36, 39 hours. No water, no air, no nothing. And
just their fear.
Sheer fear.
The Israeli military, now nearby in great numbers, took 12 hours to arrive. They took losses in their fight, walls punctured by artillery, another scar on this community. Why did it take so long for the IDF to go and help these communities?
I think there was a great deal of response by certain units. Clearly, after the war, which is being conducted now, there will be a great deal of investigation, but that's not for now. What we need to do now is be entirely focused on the mission, entirely focused on uprooting this Hamas terrorist organization, which is essentially ISIS, and make sure that they can't do this again. Afterwards, the IDF will conduct its own investigation. I'm sure others will as well.
There is a ransacking that has happened here. Children's bedrooms. You recognise the clothing that your own children wear. Totally destroyed. Stepping on glass, bathroom mirrors. Children's schoolwork on the floor as well in here. A little desk. Photos on the wall of the family. Treasured photos of their family. Where are they now? It took 2 full days to secure the kibbutz, for the retrieval of bodies to begin, a grim task.
When we went into a house, the first house that we went in, we saw a couple, a father and mother, with hands tied to the back, tortured. Tortured, missing body parts while they were alive. On the other side is 2 children, 6-year-old and 7-year-old boy and girl, same position, tortured. We go into the next one. There's a pregnant lady lies on the floor.
The description that follows is too graphic to broadcast. Be'eri was a community of about 1,000 people. They say that more than 100 have now been confirmed dead here. The problem is that, as we can see, many of the homes were burnt, many of the bodies are charred, and the National Forensic Service, who are trying to identify people, have suggested that not everybody will be identified. There are still a couple of hundred, in fact, who have not been identified. And for the families, that will be just extremely difficult to bear. Where there were homes, there is now destruction. Dreams turned to dust and to war, for now.
We're going to go back home. We're going to rebuild everything, and we're going to claim our life again.
So it wasn't just civilians, but a huge loss of military lives as well. Almost unthinkable that a country that prides itself on defence and security should lose so many of its soldiers in one day. 2 days after the massacre, I went to the military cemetery here in Jerusalem to witness the grief of a nation. In a military cemetery on a hillside in Jerusalem, they are burying their dead in a way Israel has not done for 50 years. Not since a national war of survival half a century ago has this country dug so many graves for so many soldiers in so short a time. The shock of it all gave way to unremitting grief. It was one funeral after another here, almost one every hour. The one we witnessed was of 21-year-old Afia Tester, whose tank unit was attacked on the Gaza border. With fighter jets threatening to drown out the eulogy, it's clear the sense of security they have cultivated here has been shattered in 48 hours. But it is, say those mourning their friends, a moment that will bring unity to a divided Israeli nation.
I believe that everyone here, those who, in the right side of the map and the left side, everyone wants the best for the country. It's tough. We disagree about a lot of stuff, but in the end, we all want the best for the country, the best for the citizen.
It's been quite a divisive year for Israel. Do you think this will bring a sense of unity? Is that something that will come from this?
I would say that always in times of complete crisis, there is unity. We'll see what happens afterward.
Families destroyed by loss. It is what war does. And the overwhelming sadness is that on both sides of this seemingly unbridgeable divide, there is much, much more to come. Well, the grief is just as stark among families who have lost so many members on both sides of this conflict. Wafaa Shamalak has watched in horror from the UK as 16 relatives and an estimated 60 family friends were killed in the Israeli bombardment in Gaza. She spoke to Sadia Chowdhury.
I can't imagine them under the rebels. I can't imagine them dead. I can't imagine that I'm not going to see them when I go back home to Gaza.
Wafaa Shamalak is mourning the death of 16 relatives. They were all killed in the last week by Israel's bombing of Gaza. This is what's left of the house belonging to Wafaa's uncle Abdel Nasser. An airstrike killed everyone inside. Abdel Nasser, his wife, their 5 sons, their daughter-in-law, and 2 grandchildren all died. 3 generations of an entire family killed in one strike. A gruesome reality for those left behind.
They found Muhammad's body. He was the first to found, and then Ahmad. The rest of the family, my uncle and his Asad, Marwan. They couldn't find Marwan's body. All of them were under the rubbles.
For people like Wafaa with family in Gaza, this sort of grief is depressingly familiar.
I lost family members in 2012, 2008. Every war we lose loved ones. It's not only this time, but this time was the most, it was the hardest one.
Abdel Nasser's home will now stand just as a memory on video. His family farm with its grapes and figs left without its owners, their horses devoid of riders. The youngest of the victims was Omar, just 2 months old. He never really got to know this world, nor meet some of his grieving family left behind. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
Well, on the morning of the Hamas attack, hundreds of young people were attending a music festival in the desert, but it became the scene of carnage as Hamas gunmen attacked, killing more than 200 people. Sky's chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey returned to the site where tensions remained high amid ongoing threats.
It was a celebration of life that ended in chaos, carnage and cold-blooded murder. The Nova Festival site in southern Israel seems almost suspended in time. It's the scene of the worst terror attack in Israel's history. Over 250 young men and women were slain by Hamas fighters. This is the first time we've been allowed in. Teams of recovery specialists are conducting fingertip searches for human remains burnt during the attack on Saturday morning. Stunned-looking soldiers are slowly making their way through the festival campsites. They're checking for personal belongings and potential booby traps left by the Hamas raiding party. The cars that people try to escape in but found themselves trapped litter the entire festival site, often burnt beyond recognition, sometimes peppered with bullets and smashed during the massacre that took place here. It's tense. From nowhere, soldiers start running.
Shots are fired, 2 now, and the army are running. Down here, the press have been called forward. We know there's been incidents around this area throughout today, and something is definitely happening now. You can see the soldiers running.
Machine guns raised, the suspect is told to undress. They worry he has a suicide vest. He had emerged with a knife in his hand. The man is then forced to the floor and is blindfolded and his hands bound. Other soldiers take defensive positions to protect their colleagues. There could easily be more Hamas militants still hiding. This type of encounter has been happening since Saturday in southern Israel. It shows how volatile the situation still is.
Get inside, everyone get inside! The reason we have so many forces here is because this whole area is still dangerous. We waited an hour on the outskirts of this area because they were afraid that there are still terrorists here. We're here under guard, but we need to let the people do their job. People were massacred here. There's reason to be on high alert.
The festival was abruptly stopped when rockets started exploding around the partygoers. Many decided to stay where they were. Others joined traffic queues trying to leave. And then the shooting started. Many simply didn't stand a chance. Survivors say the attack was lightning quick. How did you get away? Did you run?
As I said, we just autopilot, you know, pure instincts, and this is what I can say about myself. A lot of friends, a lot of people didn't make it.
The removal of bodies has happened, but the clear-up has barely got underway. This is a massive crime scene, of course, and Israel is promising to avenge the deaths of its young people. This murderous event happened on Saturday morning, but even now, after another day, more troops are being deployed to this and many other sites. Only Hamas knows how many of their assassins remain inside this country. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Southern Israel.
Well, Sky News received access to a planning document detailing how Hamas was able to carry out these horrendous attacks on Israel without the knowledge of Israeli security and intelligence services. Our data and forensic teams have been examining the details. Sky's Adele Robinson has more.
The documents were shared by the South First Responders, a volunteer group, and are said to have been found on the bodies of Hamas militants. It's 8 pages, with 4 initially made public. Now 4 more have been shared with Sky News. We've shown them to Hamas experts who've said that while the documents are difficult to confirm with 100% confidence, they are likely to be genuine. Now, this is the cover page of the documents, and throughout we've seen what appears to be a military plan to attack Mefelsim, a kibbutz near Gaza. It's just west of Sderot, which was targeted by militants, and a bit north of Kfar Aza, also attacked. Now, each page is labelled top secret. You can see in the middle there, that's the verified logo of the El Qassam battalion. And this is crucial. See the date, October 2022, showing that these may have already been well-established plans a year ago. Now, this page sets out the raid plan. It's titled Mission Kibbutz Mefelsim, a plan, however, that wasn't successful. Militants were reportedly pushed back by local security, and it's believed nobody inside the kibbutz was killed. Now, this document includes information about who they're facing in Mefelsim. So the number of Israeli civilians there, it says 1,000. And of those, 20 are described as regional defence forces. Now, this is described as one of the most important documents found, a step-by-step guide with duties assigned to teams going into Mefelsim. It details the roads to advance upon the kibbutz and instructions for both teams on how to enter. For example, Group 1 opens a gap in the wire fence and attacks from the south. Also, instructions for militants to take soldiers and civilians as hostages for use in negotiations. This is another page shared with us from the document. It details the equipment needed by the fighters and the approximate time it'll take for the fighters to open gaps in the dividing wire. So all of the main documents related to Mefelsim, a kibbutz between 2 others attacked, Sderot and Kfar Aza, north of Reim, where the music festival massacre took place last weekend. But also shared by the South First Responders was a picture of a map, supposedly from Hamas, found near to the kibbutzes that were attacked. It appears to show a northerly route that fighters were to follow. Now, we've verified 3 videos showing Hamas presence along this route, shown here. Let's have a look at the video from video 2 in the middle here. This was posted to Telegram by Hamas, showing fighters at a road intersection. This video was taken further up the route. Dashcam footage shows Hamas fighters appear. We've paused the video here. We believe the driver of the car died just seconds after this. It all shows the scale of planning behind the deadly attacks, and questions may now be raised over potential intelligence failures, considering the possible length of time in planning.
Well, as civilian casualties increase in Gaza, so too does the violence on the West Bank, not far from here. Stuart Ramsey witnessed the clashes between rock-throwing Palestinians and Israeli forces.
Another day of protests on the West Bank, the stone-throwing youths and the defence forces squaring up for an exchange of rocks and bullets. They use the burnt-out hulk of a truck for cover and to get a better angle. As soon as they go forward, a sniper shoots. He's helped back and an ambulance screeches in to pick him up. They know the score. This is completely normal here. Still at the very front, a teenager takes another tyre to make more covering smoke. He skips as he crosses back, trying to outwit the snipers. But they have another target. This man had come from a different angle, but didn't get very far. The ambulance crews move in. The Israeli Defence Forces are making it absolutely clear to everyone that they mean business. I stopped counting at 9 people shot. Across the road, people take cover in a petrol station, but another round is fired.
2 ambulances have rushed forward to get the stone throwers. They shot them just a few metres from where we're standing. Ambulances come. It's a tried and trusted method. What's incredible is that they know this is going to happen. The stone throwers know they're going to be shot. The snipers know they're going to be shooting them, and it goes on and on and on. And they'll be whisked away now to hospital, and it'll go on. It's been going on all day.
The streets of Ramallah echo to the chants of people protesting against the actions of Israel, but also against the countries who have given their support. The United States and Britain are at the top of the list. The city centre came to a standstill, men, women and children joining the procession as it made its way through the streets.
Our enemy is not just Israel. Our enemy is the United States government, not people. We are appreciating every single voice that came out, especially from Jewish Voice for Peace and all these Jews that are standing up saying, don't do these massacres and decide on our names. This is our allies. This is the people that we are allies with. Not with Biden and his racist government there, not with Sunak also that he came, all of them came to support the genocide in Gaza. This is a shame. They should be ashamed of themselves.
All believe Israeli soldiers will move into Gaza. All acknowledge it will lead to more violence, both here on the West Bank and further afield.
I've lived all my life under occupation. Now I'm fearful for my children, for my co-workers. I mean, this government has all the Palestinians, 5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza under its complete control. We are, civilians, and they have the best weapons in the world to do whatever they want.
So the cycle of protest and violence continues. The flaming anger of Palestinians and the Arab world is burning brighter by the day. Any hope of a solution seems a completely futile wish. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News in Ramallah on the West Bank.
But of course, the real fears are about this spreading far wider. Iran is at the very heart of this, with its support of both Hamas and a group called Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, up near Israel's northern border. Their involvement would be a dangerous escalation of this crisis. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi is in Beirut in Lebanon. So Alex, this threat of escalation, How significant is it?
Well, I think it's very significant indeed. It's not perhaps a surprise that Western governments are warning their citizens in Lebanon and other places around the region to get on commercial flights while they still can. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily there is going to be a broader regional conflagration, but if you look at what's happening on the southern border with northern Israel here, the signs are not good at all. Remember, after the attack on October the 7th, the status quo changed in southern Israel. It's also changed on this border when it comes to the rules of engagement. We're seeing almost on a daily basis Hezbollah militants being killed by Israeli return fire, and they are also killing Israeli soldiers as well. It is ratcheting up the pressure. Now, it is contained at the moment, but as you were saying, the big fear is that there is something that falls outside the rules of engagement and sparks a wider war. That is the real concern at the moment. We're not at that point, but many people are very worried we could soon arrive there.
OK, Alex, thanks very much indeed.
Well, earlier in the programme, we told you about the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt finally opening. Let's get the latest on that now and speak to our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bahir, who joins us in Cairo. So, Yusra, aid finally getting in, but nowhere near enough.
Absolutely not enough, Anna. We're here at the headquarters of the Egyptian Red Crescent, who sent the first 20 aid trucks that we saw go in. And they said that those aid trucks are only 10% of the trucks that they currently have there. They have 200 trucks waiting at the border to get in. And we know that there's much more aid at El Arish, 50 kilometers away, where planes of aid have been coming in with thousands of tons of supplies needed. Now, he told us, the CEO of the Red Crescent here, that 2,000 trucks would be needed to go into Gaza just to fulfill the deficit of supplies that we've seen. And that, of course, doesn't include the increasing needs of the people of Gaza as this war rages on.
I just want to see the...
Yusra, thank you.
Well, this conflict is one of the most written about, agonised over issues of the last few decades, but still clearly no solution. I went to see the man they call the bookseller of Jerusalem, who runs the only shop here selling English books telling the story from the Palestinian point of view. Once upon a time in Jerusalem, the only English bookshops were owned by Israelis, Israeli authors and the Israeli point of view. But 40 years ago, Mahmoud Muna's father decided there should be another bookseller of Jerusalem.
This is a bookshop that is the only and the first bookshop actually in English that is interested in, and the main object here is telling the story of the Palestinians.
It was illegal to call it the Palestine bookshop, but that's effectively what it is. In fact, Mahmoud and his brother have created more than a bookshop, rather a place where students study and people gather.
We think of our job as a very important job here in the city, in the center of East Jerusalem, to tell the story of those voiceless, those people who have very, very, very few voice telling their story. And I think the bookshop is the most beautiful way.
But now the historic enmity recounted in bookshops across this divided city has plunged to new levels of horror. Mahmoud is a worried man.
When I look at my shelves, I get really depressed a little bit these days, because certainly this conflict didn't lack knowledge or didn't lack literature or written material or wisdom or solutions or scenarios about how to solve this conflict. And we always lacked the political will to actually make peace. And in days like these, my despair comes from the point that we have now, unfortunately, the will not to make peace, but the will to make war.
The truth right now is that this is a conflict with no end in sight, a conflict about which there are many more words to be written. Well, Mahmoud's hopes for peace are shared by so many people on both sides here, but peace remains stubbornly elusive, and this terror attack and what has followed has made the chance of a solution more distant than ever.
And Mark, the rumble of war down here is ever present, with an acceptance that the conflict ahead will be long and hard. The world now nervously waiting to see how this Israel-Hamas war develops.
Well, what I concentrated on in this film is the experiences of people trying to live a normal life in a situation where there was intense sectarian violence, and when you go out the door in the morning, you never know whether you come back alive or not. And I had a lot of questions about how do people live in a situation like this? What do they do to try to live a normal life? What do they tell their children? How do they renew a fragile sense of hope every morning to get themselves out of bed and out the door to do what they need to do? I decided it had to be a collective story because that situation is lived in a collective way. You're always aware of other people's lives as a context to your own life. So yes, it is. It's an ensemble film of intersecting stories that play out over the last week of 2006, which was at the height of the sectarian violence. And so you keep moving from one story to the other. And in the end, it is a collective story. There's a way in which fiction can somehow get further underneath, deeper into the characters than documentary does. And especially the kind of documentaries I make are always about people, but they are observational, so you're standing outside of it. And I think with fiction, you can actually delve a bit deeper into the characters, and so I had a go. People who are living through a war or in war zones are often depicted as just victims, and it's a kind of abstraction, which means that people can't really relate to them because they're living in a situation which is not a war. And so I was very keen to bring the stories there, the sort of daily struggles and so forth, but also there is a sense of resistance that people have, that, for example, they tell jokes, they fall in love, they have babies. All of this, to me, is a resistance to this destruction that's going on around them.
Welcome back. Let's turn our attention to the weather at home. Now, there's no respite, I'm afraid, from Storm Babet today as downpours continue to batter the UK. A second red warning has been issued in Scotland, and there are a series of severe weather alerts in England. 2 people have died in floodwater. A third person was killed by a falling tree. Well, Sky's Katerina Vertozzi reports now. She's been in Brechin, where hundreds of families have been forced from their homes.
Brechin's river burst its banks in the dark, early hours. The flood defence here, no match for the unprecedented volume of rain. The result, a day no one in Brechin will forget. A moment officials call a disaster. The water surge was fast and violent. It flooded homes in minutes, cutting power, marooning those who hadn't wanted to leave. Boat rescues have gone on for hours in the wet and cold, saving families, the very young, the incredibly vulnerable.
Are you guys okay?
Yeah. Scott and his mother didn't believe it would be this bad. They thought they could cope.
There were warnings, weren't there, consistently?
Yeah, but we didn't think it would come much because it never came too much the last time.
What's it like in your house now?
Well,
down the stairs is completely flooded.
So, down the stairs is completely flooded?
Everything's floated about.
Oh my goodness, what's... I didn't even see you've got a rabbit down here.
We just got him. I've had to leave the body because the cage is far too big. We'll come back tomorrow, hopefully, and get that in a car.
I'm so sorry, Scott. What a night you've had.
I know.
There is just still so much water here, and this is now, 12 hours since the river in this town burst its banks. Everywhere you look, it's submerged vehicles. You can see how high the water level got to when it peaked, able to get into homes through the windows. And when you see that, you think, really, what are a couple of sandbags by a front door going to save?
They certainly weren't able to save Christine and Davy's flat.
Kitchen's quite bad, very bad, I would say, and our bathroom's bad. I mean, it's just hard to believe, you know.
Christine, who's partially sighted, left yesterday afternoon when the evacuation order came in. The couple returned this morning to this.
I bet you can't believe this has happened.
No, and you think it's not going to happen to us, you know. And I know it sounds selfish, but you do believe that. And times like this, reality is a way of saying, you know something, I told you. You know what I mean? Doesn't make it any easier.
Oh, saving grace, I've got my photos. Carpets could be replaced, furniture could be replaced, but it's just the memories as well. With the grandchildren and that.
I know. It's just dead.